Hi, I'm Deborah Dahab. I'm an intercultural psychologist and an expat and cultural transition coach. And my goal and mission is to help you, expat, go through your intercultural transition and your cultural transition process in a smooth and easy way. Today, we're going to talk about the U curve, a process which includes cultural shock phase, which is something we talked about in another video. So please subscribe if you like the video so you can receive notifications every time I post new content. So let's get to it. Okay, so I talked about cultural shock in a previous video, and so I won't go into it too much today. I'm going to talk about the overall process, which is called the cultural adjustment process. Now, there are many different ways of looking at it. There are a lot of people researching this area. But one of the theories, which is actually from the 1960s, I think it resonates with a lot of people. And many of my clients and people who participate in my workshops really seem to identify themselves with these phases. This is not the only model there is, but it's one of the models that I think really resonates with people very well. Resonated with me. So cultural shock was a term coined by a Finnish individual, sociologist called Oberg. He lived in the States, he was working in the States, and he observed the characteristics of cultural shock with Finnish students that went to Princeton, which is where he was teaching and studying and researching. So typical characteristics of cultural shock are, feeling homesick, not being able to communicate and feeling very frustrated about that, having, fits of anger over minor frustrations, fear of being cheated or robbed or taken advantage of. So these are the main characteristics of cultural shock, and you can learn more about them in the other video. Here, I'm going to talk about the broader view, the process as a whole. And this is really important, I think, for anyone going through cultural transition, because we tend to, without this information, we tend to think that what we're living is never going to go, never going to pass. And that's not the case, right? It's really an interesting piece of information that this particular piece of information is something that with people who participate in my events and my workshops and my clients, usually they go like, oh my God, I'm so relieved because I didn't know this actually was a thing, that it had phases and it will pass. So this is something that I think really helps people. That's why I decided to dedicate a whole video on it. Let's get to it. The first phase of cultural adjustment in this model is regarding honeymoon phase. Now, the honeymoon phase is that time when you've probably just arrived and you're still kind of like with the tourist eyes, like you are kind of like everything is new, you're trying new food, you're going to the new places, everything is new and that have that excitement of novelty. This is the honeymoon phase. I don't like to put, some people put like it lasts from 3 to 5 months or whatever. I don't like to do that because I myself have lived situations where my honeymoon was extremely short, maybe a couple of hours, because I had already lived in that country before. So I kind of knew about the sights and the foods, etc. So I got, straight to the nitty-gritty. But, and it will also depend on your financial situation. If you're financially struggling, you have to go very quickly to work, the honeymoon might be shorter. If you have kids involved in the move and the transition, it also might be shorter because usually parents are worried about their child's transition in school, etc. So if you have to do with bureaucracy or paperwork early on, that can also shorten the honeymoon. There are ways to make it longer, which I will share in another video. Some ideas that can help people make their honeymoon last longer. So the first phase is the honeymoon phase. The second phase is when you start feeling all the symptoms of cultural shock. So the novelty, the excitement wears off, and you start having these feelings of homesickness, helplessness, not being able, really feeling that you're not able to communicate. If you're working in the new environment, this can also mean that people adjust their behavior towards you. So for example, in the first weeks or months, or it depends, people will kind of cut you some slack because you're not from here. They might be more lenient, might be more flexible. And then after a while, they go like, okay, now it's time to deliver. And especially if you're in a corporate environment, this can happen a lot. So the cultural shock can be precipitated by, your own feelings, or also people's feelings or attitudes and behaviors towards you, because they believe that, okay, you've passed the get to know you phase, which might not be true for you, but in other people's view, especially in the workplace, that can take place because, results have to be delivered. I don't know if you've identified with anything I've said so far. So the cultural shock phase, I've talked extensively about that in the other video. I'm not going to talk too much about it here, but it's basically that feeling, that is that anxiety that we have from losing our way of doing things, and of not being able to communicate, as I said, feeling homesick, many times idealizing back home how things were done. We tend to, remember only the good stuff. And the next phase, after a while, we go through an adjustment phase. So the adjustment phase, in many of my clients, shows up as internal negotiation. So kind of like, yeah, this thing here I don't like, but there's other things I like. So it comes to a point where, you start coming to terms with certain characteristics, like, I don't know, things, people are not, I don't find people very productive here. I really can't get that much of a job done at work, but, they're very welcoming and affectionate. So it's kind of like you internally negotiate these, the pros and cons. And if the pros are higher than the cons, then you probably will go into the other phase. If the cons are higher than the pros, then you might think of leaving, or you might think of, changing your job or changing something. So it will depend on this internal negotiation. But this phase is something that, this adjustment phase, you start to feel a little bit more comfortable. One example that I like to give is that in this phase, we many times, well, in my case, I can give my own example, is like going to, I like to give this example a lot, going to the supermarket and being able already to, I don't spend hours looking at labels and what's in there, and I already have my favorite brands, I know what I want to buy, I go in, I choose, and I leave. So that, for me, is an example of an adjustment phase. Of the adjustment phase, exactly. So it's that feeling that you kind of already know how things work and you don't dwell on the small stuff anymore. And after that, again, the timing will depend on your particular situation. And after that, you will have the stable stage. And the stable stage is where you start to feel like parts of this new culture feel like your own. And when you leave that culture, you miss it. So it can be a certain food, it can be, when you change culture, sometimes it's the timing of certain meals, like some places eat dinner earlier or later. Some places have a, people have a sit down lunch. Even if, when they're working. Other places you will have a sandwich, a very quick lunch. So these habits will start to incorporate in your life and you will miss them. That's when you've reached the stable stage. In the model, this is the U curve because it goes like this, and it has to do with your feelings. So in the honeymoon stage, your feelings are very positive. Then it goes down in the cultural shock phase and it starts going up again. So we have a U-shaped curve. There's another part to this curve which makes it from a U to a W that has to do with reverse cultural shock, which I won't talk about today. I will talk about in another video, and it has to do with the process of adjustment when you go back to your home country. And that's a whole other issue that I'll tackle in another video for you. I hope this was helpful, and just knowing this sometimes really helps, because when you're in the cultural shock phase, many times you think that's it, right? And it is a phase. It will pass. Of course, that with help from a coach, or if you're feeling like more towards depressed state, from a therapist, or even from someone who is empathetic and has been through that, can help you cope better with the phases that are not so positive. I do give some ideas how to cope better in the cultural shock video, which is also available in the channel. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful, and please comment, please subscribe if you want to receive notifications of more comment. I'd love to see you there, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.